Hello everyone, this is Teaching Writing in College, where the driving question is, how can instructors in higher education leverage theory, science, pedagogy, and craft most effectively to help their learners with writing? I'm glad to have you along today for another episode, and I would like to start a summer reflection series. I'm about a little maybe more than halfway through the summer, and I think it'd be good to think about what I'm doing over the next year in my classes. And so I think the summer reflection series will help that along. It'll hold me responsible a little bit. I'm going to introduce something that I would like to try this year to improve my teaching. And the title for this one it'll kind of be a theme for what I'm going to try to do this year. But students can be accomplished novices, and so can teachers. And so that's where I'd like to start. And so to think about that just a little bit, students can be accomplished novices and so can teachers. The idea of an accomplished novice, you may be familiar with this. I first learned about it in Writing Across Contexts by Kathleen Blake Yancey and Leanne Robertson and Kara Taksak. And in that book, what they say is that the identity between complete novice and full expert is an important place to be. We want to have our identities between those two. We want our students to have an identity as a writer between a complete novice that has no experience and a full expert that has all the experience and all the answers. And the reason why we want students to be between those is because then it promotes a mindset conducive to learning. It's easier to say, oh, I do have some experience I can rely on. I do have something in my past that I can draw from. But also, I need to learn more. I don't have all of the answers. Because also, if we feel like we have all of the answers, we feel like if we have all of the answers, then we tend to shut down. So the idea that I can always learn more, that's a mindset that we want students to try to have. And I think that's also true for teachers, because teaching is not an innate skill. It's not based on personality or style, even though that's kind of the assumption usually. Dr. Skeen has a teaching style, I hear sometimes. And I think when people say that, I think what they're doing is they're kind of thinking about decisions that I'm making and they're attributing them just to me, when oftentimes in the classroom what I'm doing is I'm basing decisions on things that I've learned about teaching. Or, if I have a good rapport with students, then that might be mistaken for style, but really that's kind of my personality and my rapport. But anyway, teaching is a learned skill, and one way that I like to think about it that I got from my dean here at GCU, Sherman Elliott, he always talks about teaching in terms of a craft. He has an EDD, a Doctor of Education degree, and when he talks about a craft, I think about things like apprenticeship. I think about learning skills and adapting them. And so when you're a teacher and you have the craft of teaching, you're learning about skills in teaching and you're adapting them, and you're learning. You're an apprentice as well. And so I really like that. It's something that you develop along the way and you get good at. So I really like that characterization. And I think if teachers are accomplished novices, then they can develop their craft. And so to move on, one thing we are striving for is expertise. And so when I think about student writers, I've got these attributes of expertise that I got from How People Learn, the book cited there on this slide. But when I go through these different things, it's a lot easier for me to talk about expertise in terms of writing and what I hope students can do, or what I try to help students strive toward, even though, I may only have them for a semester. I can kind of tell what expertise in writing looks like. And so, number one, experts notice features and meaningful patterns of information that are not noticed by novices. It's really important to kind of tease out the difference between experts and novices, which is what they're doing in this book, How People Learn, on page 31. But experts notice features and meaningful patterns of information that are not noticed by novices. I notice myself doing this quite a bit. Meaningful patterns of information, just for example, in a scientific article, being able to recognize that there is a pattern of classical argument that's kind of inherent to articles that are done scientifically, where they have things like an introduction, a review of literature, and then they've got, methods and results and so on. And then they talk about maybe shortcomings in their study. When they start to talk about those shortcomings, that is anticipating different points of view or anticipating weaknesses, which is an important part of classical argument that a lot of us writing teachers are familiar with. And I just noticed that my students don't. And so I bring it in and I can turn that into a lesson plan. Experts have acquired a great deal of content knowledge that is organized in ways that reflect a deep understanding of their subject matter. And so that's something that, our field does for us and we learn about, especially genre, a really important way to frame writing that makes it applicable across contexts. It promotes transfer. And so a lot of other details about writing that support genres and writing in different genres becomes important. Experts' knowledge cannot be reduced to sets of isolated facts or propositions, but instead reflects contexts of applicability. That is, the knowledge is conditionalized on a set of circumstances. And so that's just the idea that, when an expert is looking at some sort of problem, they can say, okay, this particular bit of knowledge is useful for this problem, but this other particular piece of knowledge isn't helpful for this particular problem. And so also really important. Number 4, experts are able to flexibly retrieve important aspects of their knowledge with little attentional effort. To go back to that first one about meaningful patterns, it's just something that I notice, and I bet you do too. You notice, things that you don't have to really think about in order to assess a piece of writing or to decide what to do next for a particular piece of writing. It just comes to you, and that's because you have expertise in that. Number 5, though experts know their disciplines thoroughly, this does not guarantee that they're able to teach others. And that, to me, is because teaching itself is a separate skill set. It's a separate body of knowledge, a separate form of expertise. And so we need to have that kind of expertise as well. And that's something that I'm working on. So, even if I do have a PhD in rhetoric, and even if I have been teaching writing for about 25 years now, that doesn't guarantee that I can teach students. It's something I have to work at. Experts have varying levels of flexibility in their approach to new situations. And the idea there is that, sometimes we have tried and true methods for doing something that are kind of automatic to us, and then sometimes we need to make adjustments. One that comes to mind for me that I think is really great comes from a book called Make It Stick, and I may have talked about this before, but I'm going from memory here, but there is one story kind of about this where there is a doctor who goes into the emergency room. He's been called into the emergency room because a patient was out hunting in a field and a stray slug from a shotgun or some buckshot or something like that. A stray slug lodged in the back of his head, kind of at the base of his skull. And there is a really important artery in there. And the person was unconscious. He didn't quite know what had happened to him. But he didn't, die from this. But the surgeon had to decide on the fly how to take care of that kind of a wound. And he drew from some other experience he had. He has to be careful about how he ties things off or what he uses with it. And so, instead of using some sort of a synthetic material to tie it off, he borrowed some muscle from another part of the patient's body and used that. And the muscle has properties that, help it stay together better. And he was able to successfully operate on this patient. And so sometimes, a method like setting a broken arm, that's probably pretty straightforward. And then sometimes there are these other things where new situations emerge and expertise has to be drawn from for those. But those things can happen in writing too. Sometimes we have a special problem that we have to figure out, and we try to figure out the best way to do it. Next slide here. Teachers are experts, but they are also accomplished novices, kind of like I was talking about a few minutes ago. I think we should position ourselves in between absolute noviceship and full expertise because there's a lot to know. We have to know our subject matter. We have to know how we learn, how students learn. We have to know how transfer works. And all of those on their own are fairly complex. And so we need to have a lot of things happening at the same time. And so the more we can learn about those, the better off we are as teachers and the better off our students are. And we also have previous experience with all of these things. We can evaluate that experience. We can use that evaluation to make judgments about our own teaching practice while also deepening our own learning. In other words, we can think metacognitively about our own teaching, and we can do that all the time. And so lesson plans, in my view, are always kind of a work in progress. They're something that we're always trying to make better, and we think about our own performance. And so striving for expertise for teachers, if I've got this same set of points about experts, what experts are and what novices are, from the How People Learn book, I have a harder time talking about these in terms of teaching. Experts notice features and meaningful patterns of information that are not noticed by novices. I've been in the classroom a long time, but it was, I would say, over a decade before I started to really figure out or notice how or whether my students might be learning. And I'll have to tell that story sometime. I do have a particular story about that, but it involved, incorporating things like classroom assessment techniques into my everyday conversations with students. And then it was easier for me to figure out how much they were learning and retaining and stuff like that. Experts have acquired a great deal of content knowledge that is organized in ways that reflect a deep understanding of their subject matter. When I thought about this statement, I think one thing we're talking about there, that's another way to say threshold concepts. And for writing, for me, genre is easily a threshold concept. For teaching, I'm less sure what threshold concepts are. So I thought about this when I was putting this slide together. I think transfer is a really great way to think about threshold concepts for teaching. Transformative learning is another one. Things from Meyer and Land, I think, can give us some clues about what content knowledge is, organized in ways that reflect a deep understanding of teaching. Number 3, experts' knowledge cannot be reduced to sets of isolated facts or propositions. They reflect contexts of applicability. And I would say, the story I told a few minutes ago might help with that. Just the idea that teaching is a craft. And so you really have to accumulate a lot of knowledge first. And then one thing I know about this is that, you do have to have a very solid foundation of factual knowledge about teaching to be able to conditionalize that knowledge later. And so that's something that we have to accumulate as teachers. We have to accumulate that, the factual knowledge, and conditionalize it as we go. Experts are able to flexibly retrieve, this is number 4, important aspects of their knowledge with little attentional effort. That's getting easier for me sometimes, but there are still things, like I said, that I want to work on. Some things I've kind of internalized, and I've deliberately tried to do that. I hope some of that comes out this summer. There are some things I'd like to say about, making lesson plans and things, or at least a way that I do it that I think is really useful. And I can do that with little attentional effort, but there are other things that are going to take a lot more attentional effort, and we'll get to those this summer too. Though experts know their discipline thoroughly, this is number 5, though experts know their disciplines thoroughly, this does not guarantee they are able to teach others. I guess this one is about teaching. Hopefully teachers, I think when people get degrees in education, they have an edge on other folks in higher education or at any other level. Being able to understand how people learn is really important there. Number 6, experts have varying levels of flexibility in their approach to new situations, and some ways to think about that. I think now that's kind of applicable because as AI has become more and more common, then we have to think, what are some of the tried and true methods that we have, the things that we've done automatically before, and how have those been disrupted by AI? Evaluating student work becomes a lot more difficult, and figuring out how to see that they have learned becomes more difficult. And so learning as much as we can about that, and then finding ways to adapt, I think, is really important. And that's something we're still working on. Like I say, as a teacher, when I look at these questions and I think about my teaching expertise, I'm a lot less comfortable than I am when it comes to writing. So placing myself in the position of accomplished novice, this is a little project that I want to take on. And so I've decided, one thing I want to know is I want to know more about how communicating like a coach or a trainer might help students, how it might impact their performance during class. And I just think about this, and I do have some prior knowledge and experience with this. So one is I already know that practice is important. That's one of the ways that people internalize a skill set or internalize knowledge is through practice. I also know that communication from coaches and trainers can help me. And I think I've said this on the podcast before. I do like to work out. I'm in the habit of doing that. I have subscriptions to apps, and I'm thinking of a particular one of my favorites. I do have some go-tos, and my wife and I have a Nordic Trek bike, a workout bike like a Peloton. It's Nordic Trek's competitor to the Peloton, and it's got a screen. We have a subscription to their app. It's called iFit. And there's a particular trainer I like on there, Gideon Akande, who was a football player in college, and he's an athletic trainer, and he's a machine. But one of the things that he does that I think is really helpful to me is that when he talks, through the entire session, like a half-hour session on the bike, he's motivating. He calls everybody an athlete, which I think is important. It kind of positions them in a place where they can succeed mentally. And I really do get a lot out of that positive, motivating talk. He talks about how, here's how it's going to benefit you. And sometimes, on the live streams, people will text in and ask for advice, and he'll answer that advice. So there are lots of really great things that he does. He also always goes over the basics, like right at the beginning of a session. There are 3 basic positions that he uses on the bike and has us go through, coaches us through those. He'll ask us to test our limits, and so he does a lot of really neat things that I think are helpful. And another thing that I know, I don't have it on this slide, but another thing that I know is that in my reading about practice from a few years ago, one of the things that some of the research says is that feedback sometimes is best applied in the moment when somebody is doing something. And that's kind of tricky for writing teachers, because the usual method or the usual routine is to have students do a draft, and then the teachers might, get those drafts and provide some feedback, and then the student revises, or they'll do a peer review and they'll revise. But and that is kind of in the moment, but it will take, a week to do something like that. And it's harder to reach the student when they're actually doing something, when they're actually practicing a writing skill. And so I'm hoping that I'll be able to kind of use some of the same kind of motivating language that Gideon Akande uses. If I can adapt that, or some of the other trainers that I follow, if I can adapt that to what happens in class, maybe I'm going to be able to help students a little bit more. So that's my goal. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to review what Gideon does. I'm going to try to film just a short video to show you when I'm on the bike, just how he talks to the people that are in his studio, and by extension to the people that are on the app. And then I'm going to try to put a name to it. I want to see if I can find something in exercise science or sports psychology. I've got to do a little bit of research to see if I can find a name for this. I want to learn a little bit more about it. And then what I want to do is adapt and implement that in my own teaching and report my progress from time to time, because in the fall semester I'm going to be practicing that. So that's my goal. And so a question to you is, how are you developing your teaching expertise? If you would like to write in and talk about what you're working on a little bit, you could let me know. Email is teachingwritingincollege@gmail.com. Facebook, Teaching Writing in College. Blue Sky @teachingwriting.bsky.social. YouTube @teachingwritingincollege. Mastodon, mastodon.social/@teachingwritingincollege. I spent a little bit of time looking for some social media venues. I know I've been on Facebook for a while. I discovered Blue Sky some months ago, and I thought that might be a good one. It's like Twitter. Mastodon, also probably less well known, and I thought that might be a good place to try. Just mostly me experimenting, but if you want to get on there and check that out, if you do something like in your browser, if you go to mastodon.social/@teachingwritingincollege, you don't have to log in or anything. I think you'll be able to see a page that I have set up there. But right now, those are my socials. So I hope you're having a good summer. I know that I am, and I'm just trying to think also about what's coming up in the fall. I'm trying to rest, but also I'm trying to get ready. And so I really appreciate you listening, and I hope to hear from you. And I also wish you the best until next time. Thanks so much.